Hi, I'm Jason. Welcome to Small Groups. I hope y'all are all having a great time. Before we started, you should have went through an activity where in your small group you separated it up into 3 smaller groups, and each group was given a situation. And in that situation, you had to prepare 5 things, 5 essentials that you would take with you to go on an adventure, go on a hike, go on a journey either through the jungle, the tundra, or the desert. And so I hope each of you in your groups thought about the essential things that you would want to take with you. The essential things like water, food, something to protect yourself, maybe a knife, maybe something to start a fire to keep warm, or even some shelter. These are things that we would need to survive those situations, those circumstances, help us go through that journey a little easier. And so in 2017, we've been challenged at New Life to go and make disciples. And I love that challenge. It's one that I try to live by throughout my whole life, and I'll continue to pursue as my life continues. But as we go and as we're challenged to go and make disciples, how are we preparing ourselves to be His disciples? And so tonight, I'm just going to talk briefly about preparing ourselves for discipleship. And as I do that, I'm going to read out of Mark chapter 4, verses 3 through 8. It's one of my favorite parables. It's the parable of the sower. And Mark 4, verse 3 said, "Listen, behold, the sower went out to sow, and it happened as he sowed that some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds of the air came and devoured it, and some seed fell on stony ground, where it did not have much earth, and immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, it was scorched, and some seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and yielded no crop. But other seeds fell on good ground, and yielded a crop that sprang up, increased, and produced some 30-fold, some 60, and some 100. And as I read that, I want to make sure that my life, my heart, my mind is that good soil for the Lord to plant the seed of discipleship where it can grow and it can produce some 60, some 30, some 100-fold. But how do we do that? How do we prepare ourselves for our heart to be that fertile soil for God to work through? Well, if we go through this parable, the first part of the parable talks about the seed that falls on the wayside. And later on in this chapter, the Lord Jesus talks about, He's explaining this parable to His disciples, and He says the seed that falls on the wayside is like us receiving the word, and then immediately Satan, the enemy, comes and takes that word away from us. And so how do we prevent ourselves from receiving that call to discipleship, but immediately Satan coming and taking that out of our hearts, taking away that burden that we feel for the lost souls? How do we prevent that? Well, that's through prayer. And I love what it says in Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. It says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. With thanksgiving let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God and will surpass all understanding and will guard our hearts and our minds." So that said, don't be worried about nothing, but just pray and lift your concerns, lift your voice to God, and He will protect our hearts and our minds. So if we want to take the step toward our hearts being that fertile ground for the Lord to work through, we have to make sure we're setting that time aside every day to pray. We're asking Him, Lord, protect my heart, protect my mind. Give me that burden each and every day to go out and reach these people, these lost people that I've been called to reach by You. And so we have to make sure we set aside that time each and every day to pray, to meditate on His Word. The second part of that parable talks about the seed that fell on stony ground. And Jesus explains that the seed that fell on the stony ground is like someone receiving the word, but they have no roots. And so later on down the road, maybe that's 2 weeks or 2 months, the trials and tribulations of life attack us. And since we aren't rooted, we wither away. And so how do we prevent ourselves, looking back at ourselves, how do we prevent ourselves from receiving this call for discipleship, and 2 months down the road, when the devil comes to attack us, when things at home are not like they used to be, how do we keep ourselves rooted and not wither away? Well, that's easy. We become rooted in His Word. So are we setting aside that time, just like we need to set aside that time to pray? Are we also setting aside that time to read his word, to study his word, to really ask, Lord, what are you wanting me to do as your disciples? And as we do that, along with our prayer, and as we start reading our Bible and really digging into his word, we'll find it easy to stay on the path of the discipleship, even though things of our life might be attacking us. Maybe the enemy's attacking us. Maybe our home life, there's turmoil at our home, turmoil at our job. But if we're rooted in his word, we can stay constant in our path for discipleship. And so the third part of that parable talks about the seed that fell amongst the thorns. And again, like Jesus explained the first two parts of this parable, he explains this to disciples as the seed, as someone receiving the word. But as it grows, it's choked out by these things of the world. It's choked out by the temptations. It's choked out by the deceit and the desires of the world. So how, as attendants of New Life, how do we keep this burden for discipleship, even though the world is trying to get our attention, pull us in every which way direction? How do we stay focused on him and our call for discipleship? Well, I love what Pastor taught on 2 weeks ago, Sunday. He taught about analyzing our life, making sure we have friends in place that are lifting up the name of God and not tearing him down. And that's just we need to do that in our whole life, not just our friends. We need to find things in our life that are pulling us away from him and take those out of our life. We want everything in our life to lift his name up, to focus us on him. And so we have to find these things that are distracting us, taking us away from his word, taking us away from that time of prayer that we are trying to establish, and pull them out. Any good farmer is going to go throughout his field and try to find the weeds, try to find the thorns, and remove them so when it comes time for his crop to yield, he can get the most out of it. He can produce the most. He'll be the most fruitful. And so that's what we need to do in our lives. Analyze it. Find those things that are preventing us from getting closer to him, preventing us from being the best disciples that we can be, and remove those from our lives. And so, just like the call for discipleship is for everybody, these three tools, these three essentials, the prayer, the reading our Bible, the analyzing our life, pulling out those things that are distracting us from his word, that's a call for everybody. It doesn't matter if you've been going to the church 2 weeks or you've been going to the church 22 years. These things we need to put in place in our life so we can all be better disciples. A lot of times people ask, when can I be a disciple? Well, I love what later on in Mark, it talks about the man who was demon-possessed, and the Lord cast out his demons. And later on in that chapter, the Lord commands him to go out and spread his word. This was someone who was just possessed by demons, and now he's a disciple of God, a disciple of his word, proclaiming what Jesus had done in his life. And so anybody, no matter your stage or your walk with God, can be a disciple. And anybody and everybody needs to put these essentials in place in their life. And I strongly believe as we develop our prayer life, as we develop our Bible reading, as we analyze our life and pull those things out that are distracting us, we can all go and make disciples. Thank you.